Alpharius Omegon. Try to find a more literal face of contradiction. You can't. Start with one fact. Alpharius is claimed to have been killed by Rogal Dorn at Pluto in 010.M31. Except the Alpha Legion's own operatives have spent 13,000 years impersonating their Primarch, sometimes in council with other legions, with nobody certain if they were speaking to the real one, or to a brother, or to Omegon, or, as some speculate, just another legionary behind the facade. The ultimate question: how do you judge evil in a being whose very identity is a mask, and whose most dangerous weapon is uncertainty itself? This is the Alpha Legion in miniature. Exact, engineered secrecy. Alpharius and Omegon are twins, describing themselves as one soul in two bodies. Their creation by the Emperor is confirmed. Not even the Emperor's records admit to knowing if both existed by intent. Alpharius was born c. late M30 on Terra in the Sol system. While Omegon's birthplace remains unknown, he is known as the last Primarch or the Lord of Serpents in official records. Most of what we know, Inquisitor Kravin, Ordo Malleus, who built our best file, now believed compromised probably by Alpha Legion infiltration. On that evidence alone, try to find a solid piece of ground. You can't rely on a date, you can't rely on a body, you can't even rely on the Emperor knowing what he made. Alpharius is claimed to have died at Pluto, but multiple accounts report sightings of him alive afterward. Entire task forces of Alpha Legionaries have appeared on Imperial battlefields, introducing themselves as Alpharius, as if the name itself is a venom to be left behind. Imperial records offer no definitive account of Alpharius' appearance or whereabouts. The legend has twisted into recursion. If you met Alpharius, you met whoever the Alpha Legion wanted you to meet. There are more concrete details on the betrayal of Horus than on any single operation by the so-called Lord of Serpents. His death remains only claimed with no definitive Imperial confirmation. It gets worse. The only source with any coherent chronology, Inquisitor Kravin, is himself a cautionary tale, corrupted, subverted, or possibly outright fabricated. If the data on Alpharius came from Kravin, and Kravin was a puppet, then every fact is a planted seed. The Alpha Legion's signature is not direct carnage, but existential paranoia, uncertainty as a weapon more lethal than any gun. This isn't just the Primarch as a faceless mastermind. Alpharius Omegon demonstrates the problem with judging evil by body count or atrocity. His crime is deeper, unfixable distortion of truth itself, even to the point that his own death is just another maneuver. The category of evil in the Warhammer universe isn't limited to slaughter. It also means systematic sabotage of meaning, trust, and order. Alpharius isn't the most prolific murderer. He's something worse, a hole where certainty used to be. Konrad Curze. If Alpharius is evil as confusion personified, then Curze is clarity sharpened into cruelty. There's no plausible deniability, no shadowy source to question. For the Night Haunter, evil was the mission statement, not the cost of doing business. Konrad Curze was created as the Primarch of the Night Lords and shaped by his isolated upbringing on Nostramo. His youth is a parade of horrifying specifics. He stalked the hive cities, meting out justice in the dark, murdering criminals, warlords, and eventually anyone who threatened his vision of order. The Legion followed the pattern. They were not just shock troops, but a mechanism of mass psychological warfare. The Night Lords' campaigns did not just conquer, they traumatized entire populations. Curze oversaw brutal suppression on Nostramo and ultimately destroyed the world when it failed to improve. This is where the other side's evidence lurches in. The Emperor gave Curze a legion and sent him to fight mankind's wars. Some say he was a weapon forged to enforce compliance where reason failed. Some argue that Curze's terror tactics were used to enforce Imperial compliance where reason failed. The Emperor did not intervene. The wider Imperium watched his escalation with unease, but still weaponized the terror he inspired. Documented cases show the threat of Night Lords led to compliance across systems, reflecting Curze's role as an Imperial tool. There's evidence that shatters that version. The escalation didn't stop at criminals or even enemies. Curze's retribution became indistinguishable from sadism, driving him beyond sanction and leaving him haunted by visions of his own death. Curze accepted his fate, welcoming the Imperial assassins sent to kill him, believing his death was inevitable. The last thing he saw in life was the violence he'd anticipated, the universe closing a terrible circle. Evil in the night. Haunter's Hands was not a strategy or a mask. It was a guiding star, limitless and unapologetic. A single man illuminated by lightning, waiting in the dark for justice in the only form he understood. Subscribe and tell us in the comments which evil Primarch you think was the most terrifying. Let's get back into it. Mortarion. If piety and ritual terror define the last entry, here is where darkness trades drama for inevitability on a planetary scale. Mortarion's evil is less theatrical and far more insidious. This is cruelty by design, engineered to outlast hope itself. It's not just that the galaxy remembers the Death Lord, it cannot forget him, because Mortarion's legacy is weaponized persistence, evil that perpetuates even after the slaughter ends. Start with the title he earned across millennia. Demon Primarch of the Death Guard, the Death Lord. No other Primarch shapes his legion into a doctrine of attrition as strictly. No other name reduces worlds to silence so reliably. The Death Guard aren't just a reflection of Mortarion's will. They are a calculation realized, proof stacked in siege after siege. Each conquest he commanded followed the same formula, not a thunderous slaughter, but a quiet suffocation. Populations aren't simply wiped out, they dwindle gasping as atmosphere and hope both turn toxic, coordinated with a patience that is itself an act of sadism. The phrase grinding siege is not overused here. Mortarion made war a process so slow and inescapable that survivors no longer even recognized the moment they had lost. Numbers prove the scale. The Death Guard's tactics, his tactics, did not fluctuate by whim or moment. They inflicted death with precision, one layer at a time, day after numbered day. Entire cities didn't fall in a night, they were squeezed out of existence across months and years, left uninhabitable by the residue of his campaigns. There's nothing accidental about the devastation. His grip is generational. Wherever Mortarion moved, he didn't merely end the present. He vandalized the future, erasing any chance that life could ever return the same way. People who know only the Demon Primarch title think the monstrosity began with his mutation. It's fair, a concession Mortarion's advocates are quick to make. He is, after all, a literal Demon Primarch now. But that's the surface story, a single coat of rot on an old, rotten core. The deeper pattern is in the years before, the choices he made not as a possessed abomination, but as the purest form of himself. There was no single moment when evil overtook him. Every act along the way was steady, deliberate, echoing the same misery he'd suffered, and then surpassing it in cold pragmatism. He became the Death Lord not because temptation wrecked him, but because surrender was a myth he never acknowledged. You will hear Mortarion apologists say he's the product of circumstance, that plague and poison were handed to him. And he did what any survivor might. It's a tempting line, but stare at the record and it collapses. Mortarion elevated suffering from inheritance to methodology. He turned destiny into doctrine. Every ounce of wretchedness he received was recycled as policy, callousness as commandment, until the symmetry between victim and architect vanished, replaced by systemic annihilation. So why does it matter besides the horror? Because Mortarion is the galaxy's object lesson. The greatest terrors are not spontaneous and not loud. They are institutionally repeated until resistance breaks, until hope becomes a terminal condition. Mortarion's evil is precisely the evil that outlives justice. It's almost impossible for a civilization to recover from it, no matter who wins the final battle, and that's by design. In a universe defined by violence, he didn't just write another bloody chapter, he published the manual on how to make massacre everlasting. Perturabo. The previous shadow at least belonged to a familiar tradition. This is cold logic wearing the skin of leadership, pretending at structure while constructing suffering brick by brick. Perturabo did not arrive as yet another tyrant or war criminal. A category shift happens here. The Lord of Iron, master of the Iron Fourth, engineered a new breed of atrocity, one that recast cruelty as necessity and mistook bleak endurance for wisdom. Damokos raised him in a pressure chamber of contradictions. Use him, crown him, exploit him, elevate him. No great betrayal, just a banal calculation. Son as tool, as prince, as warlord. From his first memory, Perturabo was groomed to command but forbidden to trust. There's no collapse or rebellion here. Instead, every hurt calcified, every slight built into a new rampart. He learned early that everything, affection, power, security, had to be seized, fortified, and never left unguarded. The legends and the records always mention how meticulously he arranged his campaigns. That isn't discipline, it's obsession. Victory for Perturabo means a landscape transformed forever. Human cost measured not in blood but in the depth of foundations and the height of walls. His armies didn't just win, they entombed. When he set out to improve a world, he drew the plans in casualties and steel, the monument a trench or a fortress carved over the bones of hope. No ambiguous outcomes, every operation bled into the next, whole continents forced to reckon with his love for permanence over mercy. War became a theorem, suffering a blueprint. What passes for order is actually attrition with a ruler and compass. Every compromise mortared over, never to be seen again. A textbook will insist that Perturabo's brutality traces strictly back to Damocos's example. It's neat, it's plausible, it's satisfying in a clinical sort of way. But that misses the point. The scaffolding explains the building process, but not why every window is bricked up. Every wall imposes silence, and every title he wore, Prince, Warlord, Lord of Iron, reads now like a warning carved in stone. Repeat this the next time someone tells you that military genius justifies anything. The most efficient evil is the one that doesn't need to shout. It just sets the rules, buries the evidence, and makes the tomb look like progress. Magnus the Red. Magnus bends reality itself. If you thought the destruction of cities was impressive, Magnus is the Primarch who shattered the boundary between the physical universe and the raw madness of the warp, casually, almost as an afterthought. Not by accident, not with hesitation, but with conviction. The scale isn't just planetary. The consequences ripple through every living thing, saturating the entire history of the Imperium with psychic fallout. Magnus's evil isn't just measured in bodies, it's measured in corrupted souls, mutated futures, and the sheer impossibility of trusting your own mind. The facts are unambiguous. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, commands the Thousand Sons, whose obsession with sorcery and psychic power is legendary and catastrophic. He is a Primarch of the Emperor. Exact details. It was Magnus who, by direct intervention, caused the Rubric of Ahriman, which transformed his legion into thousands of soulless, armored forms. During the Horus Heresy, Magnus damaged the Imperial Webway beneath the palace. When the Emperor ordered Magnus never to meddle in forbidden psychic arts, Magnus responded by shattering the Webway project and letting demonic entities pour into the heart of humanity's palace. Not a slow burn. This was a detonation, an event that was never truly contained. The Thousand Sons were transformed by the Rubric of Ahriman. Every metric of damage spirals outward, consequences that scarred the Imperium for 10,000 years. Magnus isn't a brute or a tyrant, his evil is inseparably tied to the psychic ecosystem of the 41st millennium. Psychic awakenings, mutations, and possession rates spike wherever his legacy lingers. The warp storms that keep entire segments of Imperial space trapped are frequently traced back to his manipulations and the Thousand Sons' sorcerous experiments. Magnus is not merely a villain, he is a walking contradiction. He insists on enlightenment, preaches understanding, and claims to despise ignorance. Yet, he is the mechanism by which ignorance becomes the only safe refuge. Every time he opens a doorway to knowledge, it's also a doorway to absolute ruin. Magnus's impact often gets mixed up with regular psychic phenomena, as if every rogue psyker is touched by the same origin, or every warp event can be pinned on generic chaos. But psychic events driven by Magnus and the Thousand Sons are categorically different, not only in magnitude but in consequence. Where ordinary warp breaches spit out monsters, Magnus's disruptions actively rewrite the laws of fate, prophecy, and causality. Official explanations claim he acts out of misplaced virtuous intent, but the outcomes don't care. Psychic reality isn't forgiving. Magnus doesn't just risk the safety of his own legion, he actively sabotages the entire Imperium's defense against the warp, multiplying the danger for every living thing. The unavoidable implication is simple. When you count bodies, he's behind the curve. When you count the total scope of harm, Magnus isn't competing with the worst. He's forced the entire universe to play a game they cannot win. Fulgrim. Magnus's tragedy has a motive, if you squint. Fulgrim offers no such mercy. He is the demon Primarch whose evil is not merely a consequence of failed ambition or corrupted science. It's a matter of conscious choice, of pleasure in ruin, of aesthetic perfection that demands suffering as its palate. If Magnus crushed the spirit, Fulgrim revels in breaking the body and the will, then claims, "It's beautiful." Fulgrim is one of the 21 Primarchs, the Phoenician, master of the Emperor's children. Exact number, exact rank. No confusion, Fulgrim wasn't just tempted once, he's the architect of depravity on a galactic scale. Under his command, the Emperor's children became infamous for their pursuit of excess and perfection, embracing Slaanesh, the chaos god of pleasure, pain, and excess, with cultic devotion. The Emperor's children embraced excess and the pursuit of perfection through any means. Fulgrim himself ascended to become a demon Primarch, melding his body with warp-born powers in an act of will, not accident. His transformation made him a servant of the chaos god Slaanesh. Fulgrim's evil is both creative and relentless. He isn't satisfied with destruction alone, he needs every act to be artful, every massacre an exhibition, every heresy a piece of theater. And then Fulgrim's story warps again. The higher he climbs, the less human his ambitions become. Instead of limiting his atrocities to absolute annihilation, Fulgrim insists on turning them into spectacles, orchestrating larger and larger horrors just to play for an audience, whether mortal or immortal. Where most traitor Primarchs serve as tyrants or tools, Fulgrim shifts into a demon entirely, losing no time in reshaping the Emperor's children into avatars of his own perverse philosophy. Every victory isn't just a conquest, it's a celebration of temptation, a parade of personal corruption. Skeptics argue Fulgrim is just another Primarch who fell too far, trapped by the same chaos as the rest. But every detail exposes the unique truth. Fulgrim's evil is not accidental, not inevitable. He sought out Slaanesh, he brokered the pact willingly. Fulgrim's descent into chaos followed his corruption by the blade of a demon and his own prideful ambition. Fulgrim stands as one of the most notorious traitor Primarchs. The Emperor's children pursued perfection through any means, embracing the chaos god Slaanesh. Angron, the idea that there was ever a rule these beings couldn't break is a comforting fiction because Angron doesn't just defy order, he makes a spectacle of its non-existence. As the demon Primarch of the World Eaters and called the Red Angel for good reason, Angron is the case study in what happens when every safety, every structure, every lesson you thought the others respected is not just trampled but annihilated with a chain axe and a howl. His legend doesn't rest on subtlety. Angron's hands are stained with centuries of blood, his mere presence frothing the World Eaters into frenzied slaughter. He isn't the shadow in the corridor or the silver-tongued tempter at your ear. He's the war cry made flesh, the Primarch who exists to show the universe that control is a myth for the weak. The title The Red Angel is not a poetic exaggeration. It's the only language that can hold the magnitude of violence he brings. The numbers are impossible to ignore. There are 9 traitor Primarchs who turned to chaos, and among them, Angron's tally of butchery stands unmatched. The count isn't just theoretical. Where he marches, worlds cease to function. This isn't war, it's extermination masquerading as duty. No niche, no apologist narrative, no bitter feud explains it away. Angron's legacy is measured in extinction events. And if anyone wonders how far this goes, you measure it in loss. Real, quantified brutality. No one else wears the Red Angel as a title or as a warning. For Angron, the real mechanism was never rage for rage's sake, but the perfect demonstration that there was never a rule, only the illusion of one. And illusions shatter. The chaos he brings is not a failure of discipline, but the pure expression of what these beings are when discipline never existed. Horus Lupercal. Proximity turns cruelty into policy, and Horus is the reason that treachery feels like home base, not a distant anomaly. The last atrocity was a spectacle from afar. Horus is the knife in the back from the person you called brother. He begins as War Master of the Imperium, Primarch of the Sons of Horus. These aren't rumors passed in the dark, but the highest possible authority, chosen, trusted, and elevated above all others. The title alone is a statement. War Master, the Imperium's executor, commander of all the others. And unlike those who fell from the margins, Horus wasn't an outcast or a curiosity. Every order, every campaign, every oath of loyalty ran through him. The proof is as close as you can measure in a legend this vast. He wasn't just scattered by fate, he was scattered by the Emperor to the world of Chthonia, a move so surgically targeted that it permanently splintered the core of human unity. Then the chain reaction. As War Master, Horus doesn't burn a single world and move on, he takes the entire Imperium with him. The Sons of Horus are not some provincial clique, but the backbone of a galactic order. Every record, every betrayal that follows starts here, on this turn. Compared to the ordinary, Primarchs are separated, tested, challenged, but always as individuals shaped by what they survive. Horus is the test itself. His betrayal is not the lone anomaly, it is systemic, a template, a format for every act of horror that follows. The power to betray millions from the center isn't an accident, it's the design. Because in a universe where evil is usually a distant shadow or a whispered threat, Horus brings it straight to your doorstep, smiles, and locks the door. Lorgar Aurelian. After civil wars and betrayals played out on an imperial scale, there's something unnerving about the quiet violence of the pen. Lorgar Aurelian, also called the Urizean, doesn't lead crusades with blades. He writes the scripture that outlives armies. He is the Primarch of the word-bearers, and more than anyone, he understands that empires are built and toppled by ideas. The title Urizen means wisest of the wise in Colchisian, but wisdom here is a weapon. He championed the imperial cult across conquered worlds, and in doing so, rewrote entire cultures around the worship of the emperor. For all the fire and fury of his rivals, Lorgar's real devastation works in syllables, rituals, and catechisms that have no expiration date. It didn't start as heresy. For years, Lorgar's fascination with faith was a curiosity, a sincere effort to fill a void at the heart of imperial rule. But the moment this became doctrine, rather than idiosyncrasy, is the moment cities started burning, persecutions were codified, and dogma replaced memory. The timeline is precise. From composer of the imperial cult's foundational philosophy to chief architect of its most catastrophic schisms, most assume the real danger is anger, madness, or even ambition. But the fact that shatters the narrative is simpler. Lorgar is a Primarch whose words in scripture outlasted the empire he helped build. At the end, there's no statistic for the amount of faith you can burn, or the number of minds you can reshape before the species fractures for good. But if you want a measurement, count the cities on fire and the shrines that outnumber memories. That's the human cost, and it always comes due.